it there. Out here, even a single glance can make you guilty." Her voice came out rough and broken, worn down by heat and fear, yet it carried clearly across the open field like something sharp cutting through silence. While Silas Crowell froze with one knee pressed into the dry ground. Ahead of him stood a lone wooden post, driven deep into the earth, isolated in a stretch of burned grass beneath an empty sky. Of course, no fence, no road, no houses nearby, only heat, dust, and absolute stillness. A young woman was tied to the post. Rope had been fastened with careful intention, not just to restrain her, but to shame her. The knots were tight and precise, showing patience and purpose. Whoever had done it knew exactly what they were doing. She was shaking, but she wasn't crying. She was holding herself together through sheer will, refusing to break in front of whoever might find her. Silas hadn't planned to stop, force the open range, thinking only of getting home, when something pulled his attention. The post first, then the rope cutting across the wind, and finally her. He dismounted without hesitation, for things got already reaching for his knife. But as he knelt to cut the knots, his eyes shifted for a brief second, or a mistake. Her clothing had been torn under strain and heat, and for a split moment he froze, caught off guard by something he never intended to focus on. Of course, that single hesitation changed everything. The silence between them felt heavier after that moment. Silas snapped his gaze away immediately as if burned, forcing his focus back to the rope. His hands moved quickly now, more careful than before, as though trying to erase the mistake with urgency. "Quietly," he said quietly, his voice rough with discomfort. "I shouldn't have looked. That wasn't right." Force in his tone, only a direct acknowledgement of what had had him ed. The woman didn't respond at first. She turned her face slightly away, jaw tight, as if even speaking might break the fragile control she was holding on to. Silas swallowed and continued cutting. Where's the knife worked through the tight knots, one after another, until the tension finally gave way. The rope loosened, and her weight dropped slightly as circulation returned to her bound limbs. Quiet. She let out a sharp breath, her body folding for a moment, as pain rushed back into her legs. Silas stepped back immediately, giving her space, hands open to show he meant no harm. Or worse, he removed his coat and placed it a few steps away on the ground. He didn't hand it to her directly. He left it where she could choose for herself. Worse. After a brief hesitation, she crawled forward and pulled it to herself, wrapping it tightly around her shoulders, as if it were the only thing keeping her anchored. Only then did she look at him, hoarse and filled with unspoken questions. "Who are you?" she asked at last. Silas hesitated before answering simply. Silas hesitated before answering simply. Silas, words. She studied him for a moment, not accepting or rejecting him, just assessing. Then she gave a small, tired nod. "I didn't ask for your name," she said quietly. "I asked why you're still here." Or Silas exhaled slowly. "Because leaving you like this would make me worse than whoever did it." A long silence followed. Wind moved across the empty field again, carrying dust and heat between them, as the weight of what had just happened settled into both of them in different ways. Silas stayed a few steps away, careful not to close the distance too much. Horses got worse. He kept his posture calm, but his eyes stayed alert, scanning the empty horizon around them. The field felt wider now, as if the silence itself was watching. Woman, still wrapped in his coat, tried to steady her breathing. Her legs were weak, and every movement reminded her how long she had been there. Forced herself to stay upright, refusing to fully collapse even now. "They'll come," she said suddenly, her voice low but certain. Silas looked at her. "Who will?" She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted across the field toward a faint rise in the land. "The ones who left me there," she said finally. That answer carried more weight than explanation. Silas didn't press further. Worse things got worse. He understood enough to know this wasn't random cruelty. It had purpose behind it. A distant shape appeared on the horizon. At first it was just a blur against the heat, but slowly it became clear. A rider approaching at a steady pace. Not rushing, of course. Not hiding. Confident enough to be seen. Silas shifted slightly, but didn't reach for any weapon. Not yet. He had learned that panic only made things worse. The woman tightened her grip on the coat. Her eyes stayed locked on the approaching figure. "He's coming," she said quietly. Silas nodded once. "I see him." The rider drew closer, slowing as he neared the post. He didn't announce himself, force them, as if evaluating a situation he already believed he understood. Silas stood his ground, placing himself just slightly between the woman and the rider. Not aggressive, but present. Oreo was coming next. It wouldn't stay simple for long. The rider finally stopped a short distance away, letting the horse settle without urgency. Orba sat in the saddle, calm and composed, as if he belonged more to the land than the people standing on it. He gave a polite nod first, almost casual. "Evening," he said evenly. "Didn't expect to find anyone out here." Poor Silas didn't move. Most people don't, of course. The man's eyes shifted past Silas and landed on the woman wrapped in the coat. Poor scenes got worse, just enough to register her presence before returning his attention to Silas, as though carefully choosing what mattered. "I'm looking for someone," the rider said. His tone stayed smooth, controlled. "A young woman. She's supposed to be under my responsibility." At that, the woman stepped forward slightly, ignoring her weakness. "I didn't run anywhere," she said firmly. "I was left there." Brief flicker crossed the rider's expression, something quickly hidden beneath the practiced calm. "You're confused," he said almost gently. "Worse things can feel different after what you've been through." Silas's jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet. Watching ride, the rider continued reaching into his coat and pulling out folded papers. He held them up slightly, as if the documents themselves were enough to end the conversation. "I have official records," he added. "Signatures, laceration. Everything is in order." The woman shook her head immediately. "I never signed anything." Silas finally spoke. "Paper doesn't always mean truth." Of course, that made the rider smile faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "And yet," he said, "it's what the world accepts." The air between them grew heavier. Nothing was said for a moment, but everything felt decided already in his mind. Silas stepped just half a pace forward, not threatening, but firm. "She's not going anywhere tonight." The rider studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod as if conceding nothing. "Very well," he said. "But tonight." He turned his horse slowly, pausing just before leaving. "But tomorrow, this won't stay informal." Then he rode off, disappearing back into the wide emptiness, leaving silence behind him that felt less peaceful than before. The woman exhaled slowly, tension finally breaking slightly from her shoulders. "He's not finished," she said. Silas nodded once. "No, he's just preparing." Night had settled in by the time they reached the ranch. Wind had softened, but the tension hadn't. It followed them like something unseen, waiting just beyond the edge of the light. Silas kept things simple. He tied the horse, checked the perimeter out of habit, and brought out water without a word. Questions, no pressure, just space. The woman stayed close to the porch, still wrapped in his coat. Her strength was returning slowly, but her eyes stayed sharp, watching everything, trusting nothing. Silas placed a small knife on the wooden surface near her and stepped back. "In case you need it," he said quietly. "Water's here, or stay over there." She didn't thank him. She didn't refuse either. She simply watched him as she drank, as if measuring whether distance meant safety or something else. Horrors. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "They didn't expect anyone to come," she said. Silas nodded slightly. "People rarely do." She almost smiled at that, but it faded quickly. Humor didn't last long in her situation. Of course, she lowered herself onto the edge of the porch, careful with her injured body. The exhaustion she had been holding back finally began to show. "How long was I there?" she asked. Silas looked toward the open field for a moment before answering. "Long enough for it to matter," he said. "At least a day, maybe more." Her fingers tightened slightly around the coat. "They said I would sign eventually," she murmured. "Sign what?" Silas asked. "Worse." She hesitated, then answered. "My name away from the land, the water rights, everything tied to it." Silas understood immediately. It wasn't just cruelty, it was control, power hidden behind paper. "That water keeps more than land alive," he said quietly. "It keeps greed alive too," she replied. Glanced at her then, really looked at her, not as someone broken, but as someone who had been pushed into a corner and refused to disappear. "You almost believe them," she said after a moment. Silas didn't deny it. "For a second," he admitted. "But I didn't act on it." She nodded slowly. Not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. Outside, the wind shifted again. Somewhere in the distance, a horse moved through the dark. Horse. Silas noticed it first. "They're close," he said. The woman's grip tightened slightly, but her voice stayed steady. "Then it's not over." Silas looked toward the dark horizon. "No," he said. "Horse. It's just beginning." Morning came pale and quiet, as if the night hadn't fully left yet. The air was still cool, but it carried a sense of pressure, like Silas was already up. Old habits didn't let him sleep late when trouble was nearby. He stood outside for a moment, listening. Wind first, then birds, no horses. At least not yet. A woman appeared shortly after, moving slower than before, but refusing to show weakness. She adjusted the coat around her shoulders and stepped down carefully onto the ground. We go today, she said simply. Silas nodded, horses hidden in a dry stretch of land, and continued on foot. Neither of them spoke much. The silence between them wasn't comfortable, but it was focused. When they reached the small town depot, the air changed immediately. People noticed them, but not openly. Eyes followed, then looked away again too quickly. Inside, the building smelled of paper, dust, and old ink. Clerk sat behind a counter trying to appear uninterested, but failing completely. Silas kept his voice calm. We just need to see the records. The clerk hesitated. Of course, those aren't for public viewing. The woman stepped forward before Silas could respond. She placed a small fraud towards the counter. I was tied with this, she said quietly. So I think I have a right to look. That was enough to break the clerk's hesitation, or as he led them to a ledger book resting under a weight. The pages were thick, filled with names, dates, and transactions. The woman leaned in first, eyes scanning quickly. Here, she said. Worse things got worse. Silas stayed back, watching her reaction more than the page itself. Her finger stopped on a line. That's it, she said. That's the entry. The clerk shifted uncomfortably. Don't repeat that name here. But it was too late. The woman looked at Silas. It matches the rope. Same supplier. Same time. Silas didn't touch the book. He didn't need to. Pattern was clear. They had evidence, but evidence didn't always mean safety. Outside, the wind felt heavier when they stepped out again, like the world already knew what they had found. The woman exhaled slowly. Now he'll come harder, toward the road leading back. Then we don't wait for him to decide how this ends. They turned back toward the horses, knowing the next step wouldn't stay quiet for long. They didn't take the straight road back. Silas chose the longer route, cutting through low ground and uneven paths where tracks could disappear. It wasn't about running, it was about control. Where things got worse, it was watching. He wanted to know it before they were close enough to act. The woman stayed quiet most of the way. The discovery at the depot had changed something in her. Not hope exactly, but direction. Where things got worse, she wasn't just surviving anymore, she was moving towards something. By the time they reached the hidden horses, Silas noticed it first. Fresh tracks, not one rider, two, maybe more. They had circled the area and moved on, but not far. Where it was, they were checking, confirming, waiting. He knows, of course, where we are, she said. Silas crouched near the ground, studying the marks. He knew before today. Now he just knows we're not staying still, horseback without wasting time. When they reached the ranch, something fell off immediately. Not destroyed, not obvious, just wrong in small ways. A gate that should have been closed hung slightly open. Dust patterns near the barn looked disturbed. And on the porch rail sat a folded note, held down by a small stone. Silas picked it up without rushing. The woman watched his face as he read. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. She didn't need to ask. What does it say? She asked anyway. Silas handed it over. She read it slowly. Tomorrow, courthouse steps. Bring your proof. She lowered the paper. He's not hiding anymore. Silas shook his head slightly. No. He's choosing where the fight happens. A sound came from the distance. Hooves. Not random. Not passing. Approaching. Silas stepped forward just as a rider appeared at the edge of the yard. Gideon Russ didn't rush. He never did. He sat in the saddle like he already owned the outcome. I brought a witness, he said calmly. Tomorrow we settle this properly. The woman stepped beside Silas, tighter grip on herself than before, but steady. Silas didn't answer right away. He just looked at Rusk, then said quietly, You're early. Rusk smiled faintly. Poor Silas understood immediately. This wasn't a meeting. It was pressure. A final push before public judgment. Rusk turned his horse slightly. Courthouse. Horse, don't be late. Then he left the same way he came. Slow, controlled, certain to disappear before speaking. He's not coming to argue, Silas said. The woman tightened her coat. He's coming to win in front of everyone. Silas nodded. Worse. Name. Then we make sure everyone sees the truth first. They rode into town. under a harsh high sun that made everything feel exposed. Nothing about Dodge City felt welcoming now, place holding its breath. People noticed them immediately, but tried not to show it. Doors stayed half closed. Conversations stopped and restarted in whispers, cornered attention that never fully looks away. The woman kept her posture straight as they dismounted. She didn't hide anymore. She didn't shrink back, was still over her shoulders. But it felt less like protection now, and more like a reminder of what had already happened. Silas walked beside her as they approached the courthouse steps. A crowd was already forming. Not a mob, but enough people to turn this into something public. Ranchers, townsfolk, curious onlookers, and standing at the center of it all, calm as ever, was Gideon Rusk. Clean coat, neat papers, controlled expression, like nothing had ever gone wrong. Silas felt the shift in the air immediately. This wasn't just a meeting anymore. It was a performance. Rusk raised his voice slightly as they arrived. "Thank you all for coming," he said, smooth and confident. "This matter is simple, a misunderstanding that needs correction." Murmurs moved through the crowd. The woman stepped forward before Silas could stop her. "No misunderstanding," she said clearly. "I was taken. I was tied up. I was left there to break." Crowd reacted, some shifting uncomfortably, others skeptical. Rusk tilted his head slightly. "Trauma can distort memory," he said gently. "She's been through a difficult experience." Silas sat forward now, placing himself beside her. "You filed papers," Silas said. "Let's talk about where they came from." Rusk lifted the document slightly. Legal records, signed, verified. Silas didn't argue. Instead, he reached forward and pulled out the rope fragment. He held it up. "This came off her wrists," he said, "and it matches what was logged in your own ledger." A ripple moved through the crowd. Rusk's smile tightened for the first time. "Proves nothing," he said quickly. "Rope is rope." The woman pulled back her sleeves. The marks were still visible. "Then look," she said. "If paper is all you trust, explain this." The mood shifted again. Uneasy now, of course. Certain." Silas didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "The ledger entry matches the time she was taken," he said, before any so-called guardianship could exist. That line landed harder than anything else. Rust stepped forward, losing patience for the first time. "You're interfering with lawful authority," he snapped. Silas didn't move. "Then prove it," he said quietly. For a moment, everything froze. Then a deputy stepped in from the side, reading the tension, reading the crowd. "This needs to be examined," he said carefully. Rusk turned sharply. Or, "You're making a mistake." But the crowd was no longer fully with him. Not fully against him either, but uncertain. And uncertainty was enough. The deputy finally spoke again. "Mr. Rusk, you're coming with us. We'll need to verify everything." For the first time, Rusk's control cracked. Not fully, but enough. As he was escorted away, his eyes locked briefly on Silas and the woman. "This isn't over," he said quietly. Silas didn't respond. The woman did. "No," she said, "but it's no longer yours." The courthouse steps emptied slowly, but the silence that followed stayed behind. People didn't leave all at once. They lingered in small clusters, speaking in low voices, replaying what they had just seen. Some looked unsettled. Others looked relieved. Most looked relieved. Most looked unsure what they were supposed to believe now. Silas Stowe, 4 steps away from the woman, letting the space settle between them. The tension that had carried them this far had nowhere to go now. Forcings got. It didn't disappear. It just changed shape. The woman finally exhaled, long and uneven, like she had been holding her breath for days instead of hours. "Force, it's done?" she asked, though her voice didn't fully trust the idea. Silas looked toward the courthouse doors where Rusk had been taken. "It started," he corrected gently. "Done comes later." "Force." She nodded slowly, absorbing that. Justice, she was learning, wasn't a single moment. It was a process, and sometimes a long one. A deputy approached them cautiously, keeping his tone respectful. "Statements," he said, "and there may be hearings ahead." Silas nodded once. "We'll be here." The deputy hesitated before leaving, glancing back at the woman as if trying to decide whether to say something else. But he didn't. The noise of the town returned in fragments. Wagon wheels, Distant voices, a dog barking somewhere down the street. The woman adjusted the coat around her shoulders again, but this time it felt different, grounding herself. I thought it would feel like relief, she said quietly. Silas stood beside her, horse. She glanced at him for the first time since it ended, really looked at him, not as someone helping her survive, but as someone who had stayed when it would have been easier to walk away, or things got worse. Silas didn't answer immediately. He considered the weight of that truth. No, he said finally. But I couldn't ignore it either. A small silence followed. Not heavy this time. Just honest. The wind shifted through the street, carrying dust and sunlight and the faint sense that something had changed in the town, whether it admitted it or not. Whoosh. The woman stepped down from the courthouse landing. So what happens now? She asked. Silas looked down the road, stretching out past the town, open and uncertain. Now you rebuild, he said. What do you choose that to mean? She nodded slowly but firmly. There was fear there still, but also something else beginning to form underneath it. Possibility, whereas the town didn't stop them. No one called after them. No one tried to rewrite what had been seen. Behind them, the courthouse stood quiet again. Behind them. The courthouse stood quiet again. Nothing about it felt the same anymore. And somewhere deep in the system that had protected him for so long, Gideon Rusk was no longer untouchable. The story was no longer, but the balance had already shifted.